folks, today we're going to try and dynamically change the snowflake warehouse on my incremental model, depending on whether it's the first go around, that means we are creating it from scratch, or if it's an incremental run, which means we are not creating it from scratch, but rather we are going to insert or merge into the incremental model. Now, this is probably one of the most common things that people do. They want to specify the snowflake warehouse, and then they're going to do something like use a large warehouse if it's an incremental run, if not use the default warehouse. The reason why this doesn't work is that dbt sets configurations on models such as snowflake warehouse prior to evaluating this is incremental value. So this means that when this snowflake warehouse configuration is set, this will be equal to false. So it will always be the target warehouse, which is the default. So this doesn't work at all, and this usually trips people up. Now, this other way of doing things is we can specify that we want to use a large warehouse if the full refresh flag is on. So it's basically the same deal, right? If you're creating the incremental table from scratch, then you need a bigger warehouse because the data process is larger. But this will work. However, if you have got partial parsing turned on, this won't work as expected. Why? Is because dbt stores the configuration of the previously parsed state of this model. So if you're switching back and forth between full refresh on and off, you'll find that this actually also doesn't quite work as expected. So there's one way that we can make things work as expected is the use of a macro. So I got this from a user called dburnett110 from the dbt Slack community. Feel free to join. If you haven't already, you can get useful stuff like this. So essentially what we want to do here is we have a macro, and the macro says execute a snowflake statement. The snowflake statement is use a particular warehouse. And what we want to do is we want to inject this into the model body. So we can do something like this. So what this says is if this is not incremental, meaning it's being created from scratch, or if the user passed in a full refresh flag, then we want to execute this statement, use warehouse large, and not otherwise, right? So let's do a couple of things to test this out and see if it works as expected. So first things first, let's drop our incremental model. Then so I got snowflake here. Let's try to select and see if it exists. So this doesn't exist. Okay. And then we'll switch back to account admin to look at some of the SQL statements and what warehouse was being used. Okay, so let's assume for a second this will be our initial go round at building this. So the statement or command that we issue to Snowflake will be create or replace debug build. So here we are going to build our model. So what we see here immediately is that there was a use warehouse large, and then the create, and things work as expected. Okay, so if we select from our history, Snowflake history, let's have a look. So we see that we started with a small warehouse. We did some introspection here, and then to create the incremental model from scratch, we did switch over to the right warehouse here, warehouse large. Okay, that's great. Now, if we do a subsequent run, which means this is the incremental run, we see dbt no longer issues that use warehouse large statement. So we create the temp view, which is normal for incremental, and then we insert, and then we are done, right? So if we look at that query again, let's have a look. So this is the subsequent run. We see that the insert is using the small warehouse, just as we expect it to, because it's an incremental run, there's no need to use the bigger warehouse. Okay, now let's try one final thing, which would be the full refresh. So let's try our full refresh run. Of course, full refresh means we will trip this flag. So we expect it to use the warehouse large, use the large warehouse, which we do see over here, and then create a replace. This should be large, using a large warehouse. And if we look at our query again, so this was the small one previously when we insert. Now that I'm creating it again from scratch, we use our large warehouse. So this works again as expected. So by putting the logic of switching warehouses into the model body of our incremental model, that's a way of switching between warehouses dynamically. Thanks again to user D Burnett from the DBT Slack community. Thank you.